Fence?
Yes.
All right, welcome back, folks. Hope you all had a good evening. Ready to get started with the trial. State, you may begin your opening.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please, the court, counsel. 6031 Long Peak Drive in Orlando is a two-story house. Standing in the roadway facing it, to the right, there's a driveway and a two-car garage. In the center is a doorway, windows on either side. In front of the front door, there's a small concrete pad porch with columns on each corner. And there's a concrete walkway that curves around from there to the driveway. On December 13th of 2016, there were 7 occupants at the house. There was Ron Daniels, who was the father, husband, Stephanie Dixon Daniels, the mother and wife, their 19-year-old son, Dominique Daniels, Miss Dixon Daniels' daughter from a prior marriage, Sade Dixon, and her son from a prior marriage, Ronald Stewart Jr. Also, Sade Dixon's 2 young children lived there. In the weeks preceding December 13th, Sade had stayed at the house sometimes, and sometimes she stayed at the house of her boyfriend, the defendant in this case, Markeith Loyd. On the Saturday before the 16th, which was a Tuesday, Sade Dixon came back home and brought all of her belongings home with her and stayed at the house. On the 13th, Ron Daniels had gone to work and come back home. Miss Dixon Daniels had gone to work and come back home. Ronald Stewart was home working from a home office that sat just inside the front door with a window that looked out into the front yard. Sade Dixon was there along with the children. Dominique was off playing basketball with some friends. Sometime in the evening, there was a knock on the door, and Ron Stewart went and answered the door, and it was the defendant who asked for Sade. He got her, told her that the defendant was outside. She went outside with him. Sometime later, Dominique came home from playing basketball and walked through the yard, saw the 2 of them there, and he went into the house. At some point during this time, this evening, Sade Dixon came into the house, went up to her room, and out of her closet got a lockbox, used her key to open it, and took out a Smith & Wesson 9mm semi-automatic pistol that had been given to her as a gift. She took it downstairs and went back outside. Sometime after that, the defendant took the gun away from her. As they were outside and Ronald Stewart was sitting at his desk working, he heard a bang on the metal garage door. He thought at first that it was his dog, which sometimes was kept in the garage. So he got up, went through the house to the passageway door into the back of the garage and looked in, and through some small windows along the carport door, the garage door, he saw his sister and the defendant. She was standing on one side of a car. He was standing on the other. He went back through the house and went out the front door, and when he got there, they were still in that position. He walked down the curved driveway to the sidewalk to the driveway, and after a brief exchange said, y'all just need to stop. Y'all need to pick this up, take it up another day. At that point, he and Sade turned to go back into the house. Sade ran up to the door, but because the knob was set inside, the door was locked. Ronald came and joined her on the porch. The defendant, who had moved to the end of the driveway, then came up and stood just off of the concrete walkway in the yard. He reached into the hand warmer part of his jacket, fumbled, pulled out a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol that he had brought with him. He said, "Nah, she ain't going away." she's not going with you. She cocked the gun, he pointed it, and he fired. The first round hit Ronald Stewart in the abdomen, and he fell to the ground there on the porch between the pillar and the house. The defendant then approached the porch, firing. He hit Sade Dixon several times. She fell down. He came up onto the porch, turned. Ronald Stewart was laying on his back. He walked over, stood over Ronald, shot him a couple more times, left, and just walked out to his car. Inside the house, Ms. Dixon Daniels and Dominique heard the shots and came running downstairs. And when they opened the door, there was the defendant running away toward his car. He turned, raised the gun, and pointed it at the door. Dominique grabbed his mother's arm, yanked her back inside, slammed the door, heard a couple more shots, then heard the car drive off, and he opened the door. Ms. Dixon Daniels started doing CPR on her daughter. Other family members started tending Ronald. The sheriff's department was called. They moved each of the two victims out into the grass to have better access to them. Sade Dixon was pronounced dead on the scene, and she was 3 months pregnant at the time. Ronald Stewart was transported to the hospital, where he spent a month, underwent multiple surgeries, but ultimately survived. The sheriff's office crime scene unit came to the house and this is what they found. This was the body of Sade Dixon, where she had been moved by other members of the sheriff's office so that they could better treat her. Right here was Sade Dixon's 9mm. Right here was the clothing that the paramedics had cut off Ronald Stewart to treat him better. Right here, here, probably read it better if I turn it right side up, right? Here, 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 here. There was a total of 11 .40 caliber casings that had been ejected from the firearm. Among that 11 were 2 found out in the street. The scene was processed, the evidence was collected, the investigation conducted. About a month later, on January the 9th, a lady named Takesha Bryant went to the Walmart on Princeton just off John Young.
Objection, pretrial motion.
Oh, go ahead.
Takesha Bryant went to the Walmart on Princeton just off John Young to buy a jacket for her daughter. It was a cold morning. She got there sometime before 7 o'clock. She went into this Walmart, found the jacket, went up to aisle 2, the cashier to pay. But there was no cashier there. So she walked over to the service desk to tell them that they needed a cashier. So the cashier came with her and they walked back to aisle 2 so Miss Bryant could check out. Someone has come into the line behind her and she turned to explain to the person that she wasn't really cutting in line, she'd been there first. When she did, she recognized the person who was standing behind her. It was Markeith Loyd. She knew the defendant, although she had never met him personally. She knew of him because he was married to her cousin, and she had seen Facebook pictures and videos and recognized him. She was also aware that the police were looking for Markeith Loyd for the murder of Sade Dixon. Coincidentally, as they're there in the process of checking out, Orlando Police Sergeant Debra Clayton, who was in the store buying some items, walked by on her way out of the store in uniform. Ms. Bryant recognized that this was a police officer. As soon as she finished purchasing her items, she went out the front door, saw where Sergeant Clayton was parked down at the end of the sidewalk, and ran down to where Sergeant Clayton was and told her there's a man inside named Markeith. He's wanted for the shooting of his pregnant girlfriend. Sergeant Clayton walked back towards the entrance and arrived at the entrance about the time Markeith Loyd was walking out. She told Markeith Loyd to get on the ground.
Objection, pretrial motion.
Overruled.
The defendant broke to the left and ran around a pillar that was standing there. Came out on the other side with a firearm. There was an exchange of gunfire between him and Sergeant Clayton. After the gunfire, the defendant ran across the parking lot, got in his car, and drove away. When the police arrived and processed the scene, in the driveway in the front of the Walmart, they found 8 .40 caliber casings. A little over a week later, police located the defendant in a house on Lescott Lane in Orlando. After surrounding the house, told him to come out. Opened the front door and he threw something out. Then he came out and crawled away from the house. Police officers moved in, searched the house to make sure that there was no one else there, and they found the item that had been thrown out. It was a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson semi-automatic handgun. That gun was sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab, where it was examined and compared to the 11 shell casings found in front of 6031 Long Peak Drive. They determined they all had been fired from that gun. The 8 shell casings that had been found in front of the Walmart were compared to that gun that was found on Lescott Lane, and the lab determined that that firearm that the defendant had thrown out fired all 8 of those shell casings. The evidence in this case is going to show you Markeith Loyd determined to kill Sade Dixon, that he did kill her and her unborn child, that he attempted to kill Ronald Stewart, attempted to kill Dominique Daniels, attempted to kill Stephanie Dixon Daniels, and that he's guilty of the charges against him. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway. Mr. Linneman, your opening, please.
Thank you, Judge. My brother can whip your ass. Within a few minutes of that statement, her brother attacked Markeith Loyd. A struggle ensued across the yard where the gun that he had taken from her a little bit ago fell from his pocket. And he fired, and he fired, and he fired. This is a tragic story that started as a love story. Not the perfect love story, but a love story. You see, Markeith met Sade on Facebook. And within a short period of time of meeting each other on Facebook, they met in person. They became friends and then lovers. Markeith was working at Texas Chicken. He had worked there for about a year and 3 months by the time he met her, delivering chicken. He was trying to make a new life for himself, trying to do something different than some of the things that had happened in the past. And when he met her and they clicked, within a very short period of time, she became pregnant. See, Markeith wanted a family. He had several older children, but he wasn't there for them. And with this new change in his life, he wanted a family with her. But as with every relationship, there were some issues. She liked to smoke pot. And when she became pregnant, that wasn't acceptable for him. She liked to eat meat. And that wasn't acceptable for him either. Her family, especially her mother, who I'm sure you'll hear from, is sitting in the courtroom, lost a daughter, tragic, tragic event, didn't like him. She thought that he was an old man and she was a young girl. Her mother was raising her 2 children and certainly didn't want, probably rightfully so, another one coming along that she may have to raise. And so she made it clear, and her father made it clear very early on, that they were not going to be responsible for that child, that it was Markeith's responsibility. He wasn't allowed in the house. And though he would come over on occasion, like Thanksgiving, and was part of the Thanksgiving festivities, he wasn't accepted. Mainly because the mom thought that the age difference was significant, being that Markeith was close in age to her, the 40s, and her daughter, 23 or 24. Understandable, but it caused friction between them. That becomes important later on, because you see, Markeith, as you will learn, had a heightened sense of paranoia, of fear. He had been robbed on 2 occasions while working at Texas Chicken at gunpoint. The first time he didn't report it. The second time he was on the phone with Sade and she called it in, I believe, and there was a police report generated. And after the second occasion, what you'll hear is that he found out or became super concerned that those people who had robbed him, some young I think he calls them jigs, were going to hurt him because they knew who he was. And so Markeith began carrying firearms. Not one, but two. And he carried them wherever he went. And he worked a lot. He worked 8-10 hours a day. He had a house that he had rented where Sade was staying with him. And he rented out some of the rooms in the house to other people that he knew. And so during this period leading up to December 13th, him and Sade had dated during that period of time. She had lived with him during that period of time, on and off, but mostly on. Her children remained with her mother, who was primary caretaker for those children. And you will hear that Markeith tried to help her out. And during that period of time, you will hear that she went to real estate school. But there was jealousy amongst the two. Now, when the police ultimately get the phone of Sade Dixon, an individual by the name of Mr. Montgomery, who's a telephone expert for the sheriff's department, takes that phone and downloads that information in a program. And you will either hear from him or from my expert, John Sawicki, who's also a phone expert, who downloaded that information, that there was a ton of texts and communication between them, and that there was periods of time during those 2 or 3 months that this issue of meat and pot came up. But Markeith was trying to make this work. And so, because of her jealousy, he would take her to the real estate school and he would stay in his car while she was in school so there wasn't an issue. Now, Markeith Loyd was not an angel. Markeith Loyd loved women. And so Sade certainly had a right to be concerned. But he tried to be faithful. But there were times that she thought otherwise. And so during this period of time while they're living together, he is working, she goes to school, they occasionally go over to the family's house. Things seem to be going okay. But there came a time right before she moved out that there was an incident where she had picked up her 2 children and they had gone to a lake together to spend time with the children. And you will hear she was very distracted. She wanted to be somewhere else. And that caused a problem between them. And what you will find out is what she wanted to be doing was smoking pot with her friend. And Markeith was upset about that. And a fight ensued between them when they got home. And basically, he said, listen, if you can't, do what we're supposed to do together, you need to move back home. And she moved back home. He packed her bags, put them in his car, and took her back to her mom's house. And this was just a little while before this incident. And so this is what we would call the escalation point of this story. So what happens is that Markeith had given her, at some point, his passwords to his Facebook. And while, after this event occurred, when she moved back home, she went on his Facebook. And Markeith was an avid Facebooker. When I say avid, the police, when they executed search warrants, obtained 33,000 pages of Facebook communication over a period of several years. And so when she went on the Facebook, she saw what she suspected, that he was communicating with an ex-girlfriend. And she was livid. She was angry. And there were texts that took place between them from the time that she moved home all the way up to the time when this event occurred a few days later. Now this is important because the police, the prosecution has those texts. And I'm sure you'll see them, or some of them. And what they don't show you, I'm going to show you. Because before this escalation took place, there was communication between him and her while they were in a good place, where he was saying to her, listen, as soon as you get done having this baby, let's have another one. And she was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And he's like, come on. And this is going back and forth between them too. He wanted a family. And although he loved Sade Dixon, even after they broke up, his thought was he wanted that baby. He wanted that baby. It was important to him to have that baby. And so when this communication started and she was texting him, she was going online to his Facebook and taking pictures of this Facebook communication he was having with other women, including the fact that he was at a strip club. And she was texting that to him. And she wasn't saying nice things. She was saying, you're never going to see this baby. She was using that baby to try to hold on to Markeith Loyd. They have all that. The lead detective, Savelli, outlines in his 26-page report all that I'm telling you about these texts. They have that evidence. But you're going to hear also that there was a failure, a distinct failure by the Orange County Sheriff's Department in this investigation, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So she's texting him with these pictures, and he's denying it. That's what he's doing. Markeith's denying it. He's like, nah, nothing's happening. It's not true. None of this is going on. That wasn't the complete truth. Because in his mind, his relationship ended, and he had sex with an ex-girlfriend. And she knew it, and he kind of knew that she knew, but he didn't want this to escalate into a situation that was going to cause problems with the child. And so he goes and decides to go over to the house on the night of this incident in the hopes of de-escalating this situation. and he drives his car. And if you can imagine their house, and you'll see photographs of their house, there's the street, there's a driveway with actually 3 vehicles. They don't depict accurately what this looks like because there was actually a vehicle over here as well. And this is from the police investigation, which I'll talk about, which is problematic on multiple levels as we get to that point. And there's a third car which has a cover on it, and then you have the garage, and then you have a walkway to the door, and there's 2 columns. And he goes there, and he walks up, and unlike what they said, he didn't knock on the door. He got Ronald's, her older brother's, attention by flashing a light in the window, tapping on the window. And Sade's inside. Now remember, there was a text exchange going back and forth up to this point. She's steaming. Rightfully so, maybe. I mean, she's carrying his child. He's taken her home out of her life that she was having with him, something that was so important to her. And now the only power she has is that child. So when he taps on the window that gets the attention of the brother says, "Sade, Markeith's outside." This is in the evening now. And she goes outside. She opens her door. She leaves it unlocked. She walks out to where he's at, and they converse. And there's a period of time, depending on who you believe, 15, 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. It's all over the place with the witnesses. But there's a period of time that they are talking out there in the yard. And at some point, the younger brother comes home. He had been playing basketball with his girlfriend. He sees them. And they're not just having polite talk. Like when we see someone from a distance, it looks like they're having heated conversation. And then when someone gets close, they get really quiet and everything's okay. That's what was going on here. And she's accusing him. And she's accusing him. And she's accusing him of being unfaithful. And Markeith's only concern at this point, he wants to diffuse the situation at first. He wants not to be an issue with this child. And so at some point he realizes he's got to be honest. Because in his mind, he's no longer in a relationship with her. Even though it's a few days or whatever, he's not in a relationship with her. So he tells her, "You're right. I had sex with my ex-girlfriend. You're right." And she says, "Wait here." What's going through her mind? Anger, helplessness. This man who she loved, in her mind, betrayed her. So she does something really, really stupid. "Wait here." Up the stairs to her room where there's a box. She opens the locked box and takes a gun. A gun that she probably didn't know how to use. Because as you heard, when the gun is found, the cartridge is not even in it. She takes that gun and walks down the stairs and out the front door of the unlocked door. By this time, she has it tucked in her pants. And she says to Markeith, "Over here," pointing to the side of the house. And she walks to the side of the house. And Markeith follows. And while she's at the side of the house, she has this gun. And he sees the gun. And when he sees the gun, he pulls his two guns out. He had one back here, I believe, one under his arm. He pulls the two guns out. And he's pointing at her. And he's saying, "What? You're going to shoot me? Are you going to shoot me? Are you kidding? Drop the gun. Drop the gun." And she's fuming. She's angry. She's not thinking straight. Rightfully so? Maybe. So she takes the gun, and Markeith, already with this heightened sense of belief, having been robbed, and his life experiences, which we'll talk about a little later, she pulls out the gun, and instead of pointing it at him, she pulls it out and goes like this and then drops it. And he squeezes the trigger. Because he believes when she's doing that at that moment, she's going to kill him. But the gun that he squeezes does not discharge. Takes a certain amount of pressure, does not discharge. And when she drops the gun, he grabs the gun from the ground and he puts it in his back pocket. And she leaves and runs around to the garage area. And there's a garbage can right in front of the garage, and she probably hits the garbage can that hits the garage, and that's what alerts her older brother, who's sitting in his room right next to the garage, that he hears a thump. Now, her older brother, you will hear, he's an engineer. He sometimes stays with his mom. He's a smart kid. He's a loving brother. He's a brother that would do anything to protect the life of his sister and family. That's who Ron is. And so when Ron hears this, he knew that there was kind of friction going on between the two outside. But when he hears this alerts him, and he's like, "Did you hear this to anybody?" And no one really hears anything, because it's hard to hear things from inside the house. And so he thinks that maybe it was his dog. He goes and opens the garage. And as he's looking outside the garage, he sees through the window what appears to be Markeith and Sade. And he decides he's going to go out there and try to defuse this, because he's concerned now. His level went from normal to sitting in there listening, kind of knowing that there was argument going on. I think he talked to his brother a little bit. And now he hears this, and he decides he's going to go out. So he puts his shoes on, and he walks out the unlocked front door. So now it's him, and it's Sade, and it's Markeith out in the front. And what you will hear is that when he went outside, they were kind of quiet. They got kind of quiet. And he's like, "What's up, you guys? You need to take this somewhere else?" He's trying to de-escalate. You need to take this somewhere else. You need to, like, calm down. Is doing his best to de-escalate. And Markeith decides that he's going to explain himself to the brother for whatever reason. And he says to her, listen, me and your sister are at odds. She's eating meat. She's smoking pot. She's pregnant with my baby. And I think she's fucking other guy. And so the brother hears this and he's like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. And this makes Sade angry. Because now he's telling her brother, who she loves, has respect for, her business. And you will hear that she's a pretty quiet, secretive girl. She doesn't share much with her mom. She keeps it to herself. She doesn't bring people in on her relationships. And you will hear that her response was to him, why don't you tell him about the guns you just held to my head? So they are standing close to each other. Markeith standing to one side. Sade's standing almost across from him, close to there, and the brother standing next to him within a couple of feet. So now the brother knows he's armed and has not one weapon, but two weapons in his possession. And so the brother again is trying to defuse the situation. Stop. You guys, come on. Let's go. But he's thinking, oh no. What am I going to do? He's got two guns. And he's got his hand concealed and appears to be holding one of those guns. What am I going to do? And Markeith's telling the brother, listen, it's all good. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about it. We're good. Don't worry about it. And so at some point, there's an exchange. And she continues to fume. The door's open. She could have went back inside. But this wasn't about her being afraid of him. This is about her being angry at him. She hated him at that moment. And so she turned up the flames one more level on her brother when she says, my brother can whip your ass. So now Markeith had earlier been pointed a gun by her. Now she's threatening him with her own brother. And to make matters worse, Ron's in a situation where he sees this going out of control. And so what happens? He does what either is completely logical or completely illogical. He goes after Markeith. He tries to take him. And there is a struggle. He has the gun, and they are struggling across the front yard. And at some point, the gun discharges and hits the brother. Markeith doesn't know exactly where Sade is. He knows that he lost the gun, and he starts shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting. After the shots, he goes to leave. And as he's leaving, he reaches his car, and he sees the front door come open. And he believes, he knows that they have guns inside that house. And you will hear there was at least a shotgun in addition to this handgun inside the house. And he fires 2 shots at the house and leaves. And what you will see, what the evidence shows, is that Sade and Ronald ended up on one side of the door, because you will see a pool of blood along that, and no blood on the other side of the door, and blood in the sidewalk. And you will hear that there is complete havoc that goes on, that when the mother and the other brother and the father go outside, they're trying to save her life and trying to help her son. And they're doing everything they can, and it happens fast, happens quickly. And at some point, the bodies are moved. At least 2 occasions, the body are moved. One, to the front area where the door is, and secondly, out to the yard, where life-saving measures were attempted on her by Officer Ward, I believe was the first responding officer. And Ron's still conscious, but he had been shot multiple times as well. And the police are called, and the police come. There is a 9mm lying in the middle of the yard with its, whatever it is that you put the bullets in, they go in, not completely in, but one in the chamber. And that's in the yard. And so when the police arrive, they rush Ronald to the hospital, and you will hear from Ronald, and you will hear his version of what he claims happened. He denies that he ever attacked Markeith. He claims that Markeith just started shooting. And we'll talk about that in detail, why you're going to need to have concerns about what he says through common sense and some of the events that transpired with the police. And so they rush him to the hospital, and within a very short period of time, Detective Savelli is on the scene. He's the lead homicide detective. And he sees the 9mm, and he deduces within a very short period of time that it wasn't Mr. Loyd. I mean, they identify Markeith Loyd right away. They know him by name. They have a description of his car. This is not a who's done it. They know Markeith Loyd was involved in this. And the question that they have is what happened? And so what you will hear is that as they start the investigation, within a short period of time, Savelli's interviewing Sade's mother, and she admits that she owns a gun and says it's kept in a lockbox and says it's upstairs and takes him upstairs, and the lockbox is open. The gun is not there. The gun is on the middle of the yard. And you will hear that a police officer is dispatched to interview Ron within a very short period of time after he's being shot, while he's being treated. Now you can imagine Ron is in pretty bad shape now, but he's conscious. And he has the ability to answer some questions. And they ask him "Sir, do you know who shot you?" And he says, "Markeith, my sister's boyfriend." "Do you know what kind of car?" "No." "Can you tell me why he shot your sister?" And he says, "I can't talk about it right now. I don't feel good." The conversation's about 2 minutes. And then at some point, I imagine the family came and talked to him. And then Detective Savelli, as he starts to unfold the investigation, makes an absolute determination that this gun had nothing to do with anything. In his probable cause affidavit, doesn't even bring up the gun in the yard. You can imagine Detective Savelli. Look at the havoc that's taking place to this poor family. These are law-abiding citizens. These are people that are victims of a disgruntled boyfriend or whatever conclusion the sheriff's department makes, because when they release the press release on this, they make it sound like Markeith showed up, banged on the door, and shot the girlfriend. We want to trust our police to do a even-handed
I'm going to
investigation.
object. This has gone past opening to argument.
Sustain.
And so what you will find out is Detective Savelli and another detective go to the hospital a couple days later and interview Ron again. And in that interview, they say to him, "Are you sure your sister didn't attack Mr. Loyd? Are you sure you didn't attack Mr. Loyd?" No, that's not what happened. A couple times, they suggest things to him about distances and locations. And that's the sworn statement he gives. And so what you will hear is that the police issue an arrest warrant for Markeith. And when Markeith leaves there, he leaves the house. He's angry. He's angry about what had just happened because he believes that Sade had put him in that situation. And there's a text at 4 in the morning where he says, "You know, you caused this. I'm angry at you." And that's why I hit you. And you're going to hear about that from Markeith. You're going to hear all of this from Markeith. And so when he leaves, he ends up going and he gets rid of his phone and he is living on the streets. And you will hear that at some point he sees news reports on this. And they're telling this story, making him out to be a monster. Those people, the news, they're here, they've been here the entire time. They're distorting the truth on this black man, making him to be a monster. And so he reaches out to his cousin, and he tells his cousin you need to contact the police, you need to contact the press, you need to let them know that I'll turn myself in if they tell the truth about that gun. Because none of them were reporting anything about the gun. Because Detective Savelli did not put that information out. He put information out about a half a truth. And he was very upset. And Markeith began to believe, after his niece contacted Savelli, and Savelli told her, we can't do anything about the press and their opinion, just have himself turn himself in. And the press then interviewed the niece and distorted that story. He believed that the police wanted to kill him. He truly believed the police wanted to kill him. And so between December 13th and January 9th, Markeith Loyd was being hunted by the Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement agencies. And he was living on the streets and at various locations, and was essentially homeless. And on the 9th of January, he went to Walmart to buy some water and to buy some food. And you will see video footage of him inside the store shopping. He's wearing a sweat jacket with security on the front. He used to work as a security guard at several locations. He's got a hoodie on. He's trying to keep a low profile. He doesn't want to have trouble with anybody. And so what you will see and hear happen is that while he's there, as the state pointed out, there is a woman who recognizes him and contacts Sergeant Clayton, who's there at the beginning of a shift. She had been to the department, but she's at the beginning of the shift. She's in uniform. She has her car parked in front of the Walmart. And she approaches and says, Markeith Loyd's wanted for murder. And so Sergeant Clayton, a trained law enforcement officer, a member of our community, goes and tries to do what she believes is the right thing. She calls for backup, and she walks over to the area of the front door. She has her hand on her gun. At some point pulls her gun out, and Markeith walks out the front of the door. And you'll see as much as you can see based on the cameras. But essentially there's a confrontation, and he pushes his cart towards her and moves to get away. He breaks to the left. And then you'll see a camera from up down there that at the point he's breaking away, he does not have a weapon out. She does. And you will hear that the first time he draws a weapon is when she shoots at him as she is pursuing him. And then he fires back. He leaves the Walmart, and then he leaves Orlando. And in the meantime, there is one of the largest manhunts in the history of Orange County taking place. Because not only now was Sade killed, Sergeant Clayton was shot at. And so they are conducting this manhunt, and they are squeezing everybody they can squeeze to make it happen, right or wrong. And two of the people they are squeezing is his niece, LaKentia, who he had contacted after Sade Dixon's shooting in regards to the press distortion, and one of his ex-girlfriends, who's mentally ill. And they ultimately arrest them and throw him in jail. Well, 3 weeks later, they drop the charges after he's arrested, but that doesn't matter. And so Markeith, shortly after the Clayton shooting, he flees to Volusia County. And they can't find him. There's no way that they're able to determine where he's at, but he's in Volusia County. So this happens around the 9th or 10th. During that period of time, they are out there doing everything they can to try to find him. They are now wiretapping family members. They are putting location beacons on the cars of family members. They are actually wiretapping cell phones, without their knowledge, of course, in the hopes of finding Markeith. And then around the 17th of January, Markeith decides enough. He can't make a difference in some ways, but he can in others. And the two people that are in jail because of him, even though they didn't do anything wrong, in his mind, if he turns himself in, then things will get better. And they did. They got better for them. And then when he arrives here, he's recorded on wiretap conversations talking with his brother about turning himself in and wanting to do so in part so that Sade's children, because there's, I think, a $150,000 reward for him at this point. Sade's children, he had an idea of wanting to have the father, her father, Sade's father, turn him in so he can get the money for the children. On the 17th, he is arrested. Crawls out of the house on his belly. Police everywhere. Police helicopter. And he's taken into custody. And that brings us to today. When you listen to the evidence, it will become clear to you that you have a great responsibility. You're going to have to measure a lot of things and use your common sense and think about the facts and think about who you can believe and who's telling the truth. And at the end of that, I'm going to ask you to find Mr. Loyd not guilty.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Judge.
Brennan.